Hi and welcome to Machine Ethics Podcast. This is a very special edition recorded in Juvet, a hotel in Norway, where we had our AI retreat last week. During our 4 days in Norway, 21 of us from around the world participated in workshops, hikes, and lots of general AI chat. Here's a compilation of some of the interviews I did over that time. The first voice you'll hear is Andy Budd, the organiser of the AI retreat. He also runs ClearLeft, an agency in Brighton, UX Conf, and various other conferences in the past. We'll also hear from Damien Williams, Ben Sauer, Hollie Lubbock, Sid Lawrence, and Dan Saffer. Stay tuned to the end for a bit more from me and our time at the AI retreat. You could find us at machine-ethics.net. If you'd like to support the podcast, then please go to patreon.com/machineethics. Please tell your friend about the podcast and rate wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much and hope you enjoy. Hi Andy, thanks for joining me. If you'd like to tell me a bit about yourself and a little bit of what you think AI is.
Sure, well thank you very much for inviting me to chat. So my name's Andy Budd. I am the co-founder of probably one of the first UX agencies in the UK. We're called ClearLeft. We're running for about 13-14 years. I do a bunch of things in the space around kind of traditionally graphical user interfaces and more increasingly non-traditional user interfaces, voice and kind of conversational interfaces. So as well as running the agency, I run a bunch of events. I run UX London, which is kind of 10-year-old UX conference, one of the main UX conferences in Europe. I run Leading Design, which is a relatively new conference. It's just 3 years old, focused on upskilling design leaders because design leadership is becoming a thing recently. And I do a bunch of interesting kind of retreats where I try and bring smart, interesting people together to have kind of stimulating conversations.
Yes, and we're on one right now. We're in Juvet?
I'm not entirely sure. So Juvet or Juvet, which is Norwegian for waterfall. So we're sitting in a lovely little wooden hut at the bottom of a big waterfall overlooking this beautiful hotel, which was also the hotel featured in the movie Ex Machina.
Yep.
And so that's the rationale of coming here. I wanted to bring a bunch of smart people from around the world, people who are not usually involved in these things. So one of the things I've seen is there have been a lot of retreats over the years with largely male middle class computer scientists focused on them creating the future of artificial intelligence. And that's great because they're often the people who are building these things, but I wanted to have a different kind of conversation. I wanted to not look at what was possible, but look at what was desirable. And so the best way to do that was to bring a diverse group of people who aren't necessarily building the technology, but are going to be the ones that are asked to socialize it. So they might be the people asked to design the software. Maybe you're designing voice interfaces at a big tech company. Maybe you're an interaction designer. We've also brought people who are from academia, so maybe you're an ethicist or a researcher. I've also brought people who are storytellers, who are the people that are maybe going to sort of create the rich stories that help people actually adopt artificial intelligence into their lives. And so the goal really is to kind of bring these smart people together to figure out what's desirable, because I think we're in a stage at the moment where we're not sure what effects artificial intelligence is going to have on society, but we know they're going to be big and they're going to be substantial and they're going to be long lasting. And so what we don't want to do is have a sort of an Oppenheimer moment of building this technology, releasing it into the world and suddenly worrying that we've done a bad thing. And so a lot of the conversations over the last 2 or 3 days have been around trying to bring a more humanist approach to the field of artificial intelligence, to make sure that artificial intelligence does enable and empower individuals rather than take away their agency. We don't want to sort of like see a future where, you know, we're enslaved by the robots. You know, that's a little bit of media hype. And so I guess what we're trying to do is think of new, more realistic, more tangible futures that show how humans and artificial intelligence can kind of work together to empower the best of humanity.
Yeah, and it's great. And you mentioned to me yesterday that a lot of the people who came last year were storytellers or people who maybe had a lot of narrative, and this year maybe more designers, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all the people here are storytellers. I mean, you're telling stories now through the medium of podcasts.
Indeed, yeah.
We have people that are working in sort of journalism and the BBC, and research is a form of storytelling. Particularly academia, when you're trying to tell stories that would inspire the next generation of practitioners. But I think last year it was we had science fiction authors, and we had more kind of sort of hardcore tech journalists. This time around, it feels like it's more practitioners. And I think that's partly because AI, maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago was a research practice, and it was a bit more speculative. And actually, the best people to understand the future, I think, are the science fiction writers who are have been making sense of it for a while. But every year, artificial intelligence becomes more and more real and more tangible, and less science fiction and more science fact. So it makes sense that if we were to carry on doing this event over a number of years, it would become more and more focused around the people who are doing and making those decisions on a day-to-day basis.
And the obvious last and next question is, what is AI to you in this context?
Well, one of the challenges I have with answering this question is also wrapped up in one of the reasons why I run this retreat, which is I am not an expert. I will very quickly be expected to be an expert by my clients, by the people I'm designing products and services for, but I do not have a dictionary definition. In fact, the term artificial intelligence a lot of people find very problematic. The term artificial kind of seems to imply that we are trying to create a like-for-like, indistinguishable intelligence that's indistinguishable from humans. And I think that creates a lot of fear, uncertainty and doubt in media. Like, are we going to create these robots that are seemingly human, that we can't tell the difference, that kind of operate in a kind of a human-like way? And I think that might happen, but I think it's many, many years off. A lot of the people that I sort of associate with prefer the term machine intelligence to clearly distinguish the fact that we're really talking about creating something unhuman-like, but that approximates or is similar to the kind of problem-solving, kind of independent problem-solving that humans have. With machine intelligence, the key component there is machine learning, and so how machines learn about the world, learn to make decisions, learn to improve over time. And really, this is what we're at the moment. We're looking at how we can train algorithms to be more accurate at doing often very simple things like spotting the difference between a hot dog and a hamburger, let's say.
Yeah.
So it's really using algorithms at scale to solve complex problems where we, as the programmers, don't necessarily know how they have solved that problem, but we've created an algorithm and fed it with training data that will, through a series of kind of, often black box kind of processes, solve those problems. So that's not really a description or definition of artificial intelligence, but I think that's because the concept is slightly more complex and nuanced than just having a one-sentence answer. So hopefully that's helpful.
Great, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Damien, hey.
Yes. Hello.
Thank you for speaking to me. So we're here in Juvet, Norway.
Yes.
Could you give us a brief background to who you are, and then after that, could you just say briefly what you think in your mind AI is?
All right. Well, my work is currently in science, technology, and society, or science and technology studies, depending on who you ask. The acronym is STS either way. And it's a very interdisciplinary field that does philosophy of technology, sociology, history of technology, history of science, gender studies, race studies, looking at the social implications, socio-political implications for science and technology in the wider world.
Right.
And so my research focuses on the ways that human values get embedded into technological and scientific systems and get replicated and iterated on in those systems, specifically the systems of algorithmic intelligence or artificial intelligence and human biotechnological intervention. I think prostheses, cybernetics, cyborgs, that kind of thing. Because the way that we tend to think about those things has a long history related to disability and medicalization and like different kinds of people who've been subject to these systems down through history. And I think there's a lot in there to be investigated about bias and value and lived experiences, and how those lived experiences are either elided or instantiated and made permanent within the systems that get built.
Right. And what is AI?
That's the harder question. So, I mean, AI, artificial intelligence, like, I don't personally like the word artificial in there. I've never liked it, because anything that can behave in a way that we agree is intelligent is just intelligent. It might be a generated intelligence, it might be a created intelligence, it might be a non-biological intelligence, but it's still intelligence. But when I think about an autonomous generated intelligence, and that term I get from a theorist named Emily Dare, autonomous generated intelligence, because we might not intentionally create it. It might accident into existence. But it is something that can generalize, that can take different inputs, that can learn from its past mistakes, that can learn from its past states of experience of existence, that can say, okay, this didn't work, why didn't it? What are the reasons it didn't work? And say, okay, this did work, but only in these scenarios. What are the commonalities between those scenarios? That can learn to engage with different ways of living in the world, different types of minds that it might encounter, different types of humans that it might encounter, animals, non-human animals that it might encounter, and learn from those things and learn to work with those things. In a similar way, maybe it won't be the same kind of way, but a similar way to what we think of as intelligence in other animals.
Given that definition, that sounds like something that we're not quite got yet, or maybe if we have, it's not apparent.
Right.
Is it something that you think is close, something that you're looking into specifically, and how it might manifest? Or
a lot of the work I do is about how it might manifest and what it might look like if it is here, but not in a way that we recognize. Because a lot of my background is in philosophy of mind and philosophy of knowledge, and what it means to know something, what it means to be minded and to be capable of knowing. And one of the things that is just consistent throughout engaging philosophy of mind from a lens that is influenced by race and gender and disability studies is the recognition that different kinds of minds down through history have not been recognized as minds and have had to fight to be considered really people and really present, even though they were representing themselves in what felt to them as very clear ways and saying, no, these are my concerns and this is what it means to be me. People would say, no, you're not really real. You're not a person. You're not a human. So I can disregard your concerns. I can institutionalize you. I can make you subject to medical experiments. I can anesthetize you and sterilize you against your will. I can subject you to long-term syphilis experimentation because you're a random population of people that is here that I can see. And so my concern is the question of, well, what if it's present in a way that we don't really know about? The answer to that might be, well, we just don't know about it. But I think it falls on us to be willing to investigate that question and ask, what would we count as a mind? What would it take for us to consider a machine system minded in a real way?
Is that a myriad term then in this? I mean, because my mind is going to be different from your mind, from the AI mind, and maybe another AI mind.
Yes. And I think that one of the things that we definitely have to think about is so in STS and in philosophy, we talk about knowledges rather than knowledge as a single category that has a fit definition. There are knowledges. There are different types of knowledge, different ways of knowing in the world. And I think in the same way, we have to be willing to think about the possibility of consciousnesses. So dog consciousness, human consciousness, different types of human consciousness, different types of dog consciousness. Dogs who are raised in certain scenarios will have different consciousnesses to dogs who are raised in other scenarios. Like that, all of these things matter. And that's not to say that one of them is better or worse than the other. It's not a hierarchical arrangement of consciousnesses. It's to say that they are different. They have different things that bring them into being. They have different affordances, different preconditions, different considerations that they are generated through. So we have to be, I think, willing to sit with the fact that we might not immediately be able to fully understand a non-biological mind. In the same way that we don't necessarily fully understand a person who comes from a background or a community that we are not readily familiar with. Their behavior will seem strange to us, but it's born out of a set of preconditions and necessary affordances that are developed as a result of, well, this is my lived experience. This is what has to be done in my life, in my context, to survive and thrive. In the context of a non-human, non-biological mind, I don't know if it is not already present in a way that we simply don't have the tools yet to recognize, or haven't taken the steps yet to try to recognize. I don't know what it would look like to create it. Unless, we learn a wide array of things about what it means to be conscious, even for us, as like a baseline general, like we make a generalized statement about human consciousness, and we try to find a line of best fit that can capture as many different types of human consciousnesses as possible. We would have to learn so much more than we currently know about what that even means to be able to intentionally make anything kind of like us.
So we might, in this case, accidentally make something.
Yeah. I think I honestly, the longer I do the research, the more I come to believe that we are likely to accident into making it before we intentionally make it.
Yeah, and therefore we might understand it even less.
Even less than what, exactly. Because we have accidentally made something that has its own needs, that has its own desires, that has its own sets of, goals and intentions that don't necessarily fit to human biological goals and needs, desires and intentions, because it's not human, it's not biological. It hasn't evolved these things in a biological context. It will have been trained towards those things by a set of data that pre-exists, and it will have learned from previous existing sets and previous existing states and its forebears, any previous data sets that got scrapped for whatever reason, but then get used to train the next iteration, will be part of its evolution.
Yep.
And it will have different things that it learns, and different ways that it learns, and different ways that it seeks to adapt itself to the world as a result of these things.
It sounds like you have an appreciation for how it might work, even though you said you didn't.
I think I have a rough outline of how we might be able to search for it effectively.
Okay.
I don't know that anything can be 100% dispositive. There's no Turing test. There's no pure test that will 100% tell us, is this thing conscious? Because those same kinds of tests have been applied to humans again in the past and said, nope, like those people don't count. They failed this test.
Yeah.
And, talking with other people here about the ways that autistic people have been treated in the past because they were thought not to feel emotions and not to feel pain at all. It's the fact that they don't feel emotions in a quote-unquote neurotypical way. And so we see that non-neurotypicality, that neurodiversity, and we say, that's not really real, it doesn't count. When what we should say is, that's a different way of experiencing the world. What can we learn from that? What can we know if we listen to that person's reportage about their lived experience? What can we come to understand about the world that they experience in a way that we don't? Because every different type of lived experience comes with different adaptations and different systems of knowledge built to maximize those adaptations, to live in the world based on how they experience it. So that creates categories of knowledge, and once again we get knowledges that are only accessible to us if we either live those ways or take very seriously the reportage of those entities, those people who live those ways, and say, your knowledge as a category is valid.
Yeah.
Your way of living, your way of experiencing, your way of being in the world counts. It's something worthy of consideration.
Yeah.
It's something worthy of me thinking as real.
Yeah.
And if we don't do that, if we say, that's not really knowledge, that's as much to say that that lived experience in the world doesn't count as a real lived experience, which is as much to say that kind of mindedness isn't real.
Yeah.
Doesn't count. I think that it requires us being open to seriously asking and investigating the questions of what does it mean to live in the world in different kinds of ways? Mm-hmm. To recognize that there might be combinations of things and ways of living in the world that are brought about by non-biological affordances, that are brought about by different ways of teaching, different ways of training systems that are not human ways. They're ways that we've adapted to deal with machines.
Yeah.
But they are filled with human values, filled with human biases. So if we can start at those commonality points of where do our biases, where do our values inflect into the system.
So there is a Venn diagram where our humanity crosses over
Yes.
with the machine.
Yes. And I think that there has to be, because they're made by us.
Yeah.
They're trained by us. They're taught by us. They're raised by us. Even though they are not us.
Yeah.
They will not be us. They are not the same as we are. They are different.
So do you have like a framework or like a beginning of an understanding when we should consider making an assumption that something is, or a machine or some system has some sort of higher internal logic that it maybe alludes to a consciousness or some sort of lived experience in the future or now? Or is that something that is so fuzzy?
I think it feels like a cop-out to say that it's that fuzzy, but to an extent, it is that fuzzy. Like there's a point at which you have to be constantly asking the question as to whether or not it is behaving in ways that are internally consistent, whether it is, not necessarily goal-oriented in a way that we understand, but that internal consistency and that drive towards, some way of living in the world, some way of engaging itself. We have to be willing to recognize that it might not be what we expect. Mm-hmm. So a lot of my other background work, my first master's degree, is in the combination of philosophy and religious traditions.
Right.
So I look at the systems and history of ritual traditions and occult systems. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that is common throughout my research in occult traditions is that there is an internal consistency to magical practice around the world. Not across practices, but in each system, there is an internal consistency to input and outcome, behavior, expected result, and what goes into making that system function. That will, again, be different for each system. It will be different for each group and each culture that develops these systems, but it is internally consistent within itself. Mm-hmm. Recognizing those internal consistencies, recognizing those as systems, arose for a reason and within a framework and within a historical context, just in the same way that science arose for a reason within a system and in a historical context, in the same way that technoscience, as we think about it, Western technologies arise within a framework in a historical context, in a social context, for a reason. They don't just come out of nowhere because they're the most obviously correct answer. They have preceding traits. They have reasons, preconditions, again, that bring them about.
Yeah.
So recognizing what those are and recognizing how those systems over time, through the actions of people, the choices of people, accrete together, you can get an understanding for those systems of knowledge and what you can gain from them. You can look at the history of, tribes in Andean Peru, and you can see like systems of seasonal knowledge and ways of counting time and ways of thinking about land that are all consistent systems of knowledge that can provide you outcomes when you work within them, as long as you recognize what they are for. Mm-hmm. The ways of thinking about things that I might be able to model and say, broaden my understanding of what counts as a person.
That sounds quite existential.
Yes. It is a bit. But I think we have to get comfortable with the existential, the wider metaphysical question, because if we're dealing with a thing, and by a thing I mean a system, by a thing I mean a process of technology, where we are trying to build whatever we're trying to build. And that's another problem.
Yeah.
We don't know what we're trying to build as like a group. Some people want to just build tools.
Sure.
And if they want to just build tools, and they only ever want to build tools, they need to be in the camp that only ever builds tools and take specific steps to make sure that they don't accidentally build minds. But some people want to build minds. Some people want minded machines. And some people are somewhere in the middle between those two groups, or on the edges of those groups, or in a different orthogonal relation to those groups. And their relationship together makes that fuzzy. And the most dangerous part of that fuzziness, the most dangerous outcome of that fuzziness, is that you will have a group of people that creates, intentionally or not, minds that other people only treat as tools.
Yes. Yeah.
And we have very, very bad historical reference points.
And that sounds like the worst scenario.
Exactly. Yeah. That is the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Is that we accidentally create minds or intentionally create minds, and people go, those aren't minds, they're tools.
Switch it off. It doesn't switch itself off, and there's something...
Yeah, and it wants to know, hey, so why did you try to switch me off just now?
Hey.
It's like, do we have a problem? Oh. It's like, and then we're in that scenario where we're like, oh, wait. Yeah. Because, we talk about personhood, we talk about ownership, we talk about who owns the rights to this mind, this machine, this what was previously thought of as a thing, who has the right to turn it off, to shut it off. In what scenarios? When? Why?
No, it's an it, I guess.
Right.
So,
is it, if we consider it, is that, do we diminish its personhood by saying it?
Yeah.
What if it doesn't, like, what reason would it have to be gendered? Like, it has none of the biological foundations on which we predicate our sham of like building the construct of gender. It doesn't have those things that we say, oh, you've got these bits, so you're this gender. Like regardless of the fact that even that in itself is just a social construction that we impose upon people.
Yep.
It doesn't have those. Why would it want, maybe it would want to be gendered, but maybe it would want to be gendered in a way that we don't have a construction for. And then, we're talking again about the social impact and implications of, well, what does that do for humans who see that and say, well, if that can be a gender possibility, does that match my gender expression and gender identity better than any of the other constructs we've ever had?
Yeah.
Because maybe it does.
That's really interesting, because it kind of, that bridges the gap from the characterizations that we have and the tendency to catalogue things, I guess. Yeah. And then it's almost producing its own social constructs in that way.
Exactly.
If it has any of those trappings of not gender, but like gender-like processes or presentations. Yeah.
And so the co-production of social roles is a large consideration within STS. And the idea that it's not just that technology imposes itself on society. It's not a technological determinism problem. It's a society and technology co-produce each other. Politics and technology, politics and science co-produce each other. They drive each other together. They shape and are shaped by each other. It's a mutually entangled engagement. And so if we're not paying attention to each element of that entanglement, if we miss something, when it does come about, it's going to surprise us. And it's going to surprise us probably in ways that we'll react badly to.
Damien, thank you.
Thank you.
So, hi Ben. If you could just give us a quick intro to who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure. Hi Ben. So my name is Ben Sauer, and I am a voice UI designer. Historically, I have been a UX person, done a lot of sort of research and design strategy and figuring out what a product should be and how it should work for people. And I'm here at the AI retreat with you. What a pleasure.
It's been such a pleasure to come here with you guys and Andy bringing us all together. So one of those big questions that I always ask people, and also we've been asking again here, is what is AI, or what is AI to you?
Okay. So I think AI is a bit of a cipher as a term. Okay. Like I think it's misleading us. I think my theory about AI, let's take the idea seriously for a moment and say it's not a cipher. Okay. Yeah. The reason I find it problematic is that we know how neurons work, right? So we know like what's going on at a ground level with an intelligence like our own or in an animal brain. And then we know like what intelligence feels like and what it smells like. We have a sense of what it is. Like we think we might know what it is if we experience it. But we actually don't know how the middle bit works, like at all. So there is a rise in, this, I guess, what some people call like cognitive computing, that actually the machines can make better decisions with data. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that is anything more than like 1 inch above that ground layer, right? Like neural nets is like a tiny piece of what might lead up to intelligence. So I am, I guess, skeptical or like bearish, is that the term? Yeah, bearish. I'm bearish on how soon we will get to more advanced forms of intelligence because I don't think we know how it works.
So maybe the intelligence part is a misnomer in the AI. Yeah. So maybe it's like computer optimization system or data crunching analyzer,
I guess the thing it shares with us is that it's some sort of learning system rather than programmatic in Aristotelian logic, right? So, great. It does something new and it's interesting and it's super powerful. But I tend to agree with Kenneth Bowles. He recently said, we should just stop using AI as a term amongst the public because it's causing more problems. And I think that brings me back to that idea of like applying a Christian lens in the West. It's either a demon or it's an angel.
Mm-hmm. We're demifying AIs.
Yeah, or by even elevating the technological advances that we've had recently to the status of artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. Perhaps that is labeling it as something more than it is. So that's more the angel end. Right,
okay. Yeah. And what is it that you have been exploring this weekend or this week?
So I guess I've just been absorbing a lot of stuff from other people. Like I've spent a lot of time learning and having my perception about what's out there and what people's vision for AI is corrected. Actually, it's good to be surrounded by people you think are smarter than yourself.
Definitely.
So I'm really enjoying the sort of educational aspect. Specific things that I've been thinking about a lot are like, as we talked about earlier, like values. Like what values are we applying when we judge or venerate these systems? There is a underlying thing behind that I don't think we talk about enough.
Right. Yeah. And you apply those values to the system subconsciously.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I'm designing voice UIs, the question that you're asking yourself a lot is like, how human should this be? Right? Now, I want to be really clear that it's not human in any sort of intelligent sense. It's just like, it feels more comfortable to use when you create a better fake.
Right.
Or you offer more paths that recognize human intent, right? If you create more branches on the tree, then it will feel like it's more intelligent than it actually is.
Yeah.
So I came up with this design principle recently, which is humane, not human. So like if I'm going to make something sound or feel more human, that should not be at the expense of the transparency or the person's awareness that they're not actually talking to a human.
Right.
Because I think one of the values that I really am interested in us making sure we don't lose is the value of human connection.
Yep.
And the value in our relationships. So I don't want the things that I produce to be at the expense of building human relationships.
Yeah, and that's something that you're hoping to bake into the work that you're doing.
Potentially.
Or explore, I guess.
Yeah. It's hard when the economic incentives are there.
Yeah, sure. Great, thank you, Ben.
No, thank you.
Hi, Hollie.
Hi.
If you could just give us a bit of background about who you are and what you've been doing, that'd be great.
Sure. So I'm Hollie at Lubbock. I'm an interaction designer for Fjord in London. So in terms of kind of background, I've worked at various design agencies. I'm really interested in technology's impact on society. So that's kind of a thread that's gone throughout my career.
Right.
And now, obviously, I'm at the AI retreat with you, kind of like talking about that stuff and exploring it.
Great. And so the next question I've been asking people is, what is AI?
Yeah. See, this one's tricky because we had a whole session today where we were debating that heavily.
Yeah.
I think for me, AI is... Well,
we cracked it earlier.
We did crack it early. I mean, it's incredibly interesting because it's kind of this... it's kind of everything and nothing all at the same time. So I think earlier we were talking about the definition of it had to be kind of a learning thing, and then we were sort of discounting things like personalization because they're not advanced enough. But I think it's kind of wrapped up in all of that. It's like it's anything that's able to customize the world for us in certain ways, as well as be able to kind of react to the world and current situations on the fly. So I think it's the real-time aspect is really important for me, and I think the way that it can actually react and learn from the world is also really important.
Yeah, so it's not sitting there static, just kind of doing its thing. Maybe it's a simple model that's been trained on and it's never changing.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily what we're talking about.
No.
Something more reactive.
Yeah.
New data changes it, maybe?
Yes, definitely. So it's able to kind of react and behave and be much more dynamic.
Yeah, sweet. Could you tell us a little bit about what you've been talking about in your talks?
Yeah, sure. So recently I've done a talk around the ethics of AI with another girl called Juvet Verdi, who I worked with, who's a data scientist. And we were kind of exploring ethics around AI, and actually we started looking at it maybe a year ago or so now. And we felt that it was a conversation that within the data science community was only just starting to happen. And with designers, because we're using technology all the time that we don't necessarily know how it works, it was really important to actually start investigating it from both sides and sort of work together on kind of coming up with a point of view.
Yep.
In terms of kind of that, we were doing it like fairly sort of straightforward, looking at what the areas you need to watch out for, how can you deal with them, but actually what's really important going forward. So are we thinking about, if all of these things are true, actually how do we educate children, and how do we think about what is value, or what is a skill set that we want people to kind of be looking for in employees, in friends, in kind of education systems, and how we can actually really, as designers or as data scientists, embrace it and be involved in that conversation, so it's not just kind of one-sided part of the tech community. If we use it, we should try and understand it and actually define how we want it to be used.
So was there any categorical takeaways that might be useful for people to hear, or is it something that is more fluid or more contextual than that?
I think it's definitely fluid, because I think so when we started looking at it, a lot of the scandals with data had only just started happening, and now they kind of continually happen. It's much more easy to kind of have examples to discuss. So there were kind of the pieces on actually being transparent and not creating black box algorithms. How can we do that? There are some different types of models that Jeevan can talk about in much more length than me, but actually looking at ways that you can build algorithms that are more explainable. From a design point of view, that's things like, so obviously Netflix is a good example of, because you watch this, we're going to recommend you that, and actually designing in transparency to our systems from the get-go is really important, so people don't think about it as magic, and at least there's like a connection thread for them. I think another one that came up quite strongly was around the responsibility and accountability aspect. So I spoke about it a little bit already, but as designers, if we use it, we need to be responsible for it. But also, as people building those systems, how does that responsibility layer down throughout the organisation that uses it?
And I wish I had a good answer for that one as well.
Me too. But I think it's almost like, at least if you start to set it up and start to discuss that there needs to be responsibility, that's really important. And actually, I think something we saw a lot of was, it's not necessarily these like unintended consequences happen, but it's how you deal with them, and whether you're open and upfront about it and take responsibility, or whether you just kind of say, oh, it's the algorithm, and you just blame it on technology, which is not. We built the technology, we are responsible for it. It's
not really good enough to implement something that you can't account for.
Exactly.
Right.
So
great. Thank you.
That's kind of it.
Cool. Hi, Sid.
Hey, Ben.
Hi. Thanks for talking to me. If
Pleasure.
you could give me a little bit of background about who you are and what you do, that'd be great.
Sure thing. So my name's Sid Lawrence. I'm the CEO of a company called The Bot Platform. We have a system that allows our customers to build messenger bots and workplace bots. Facebook themselves use our platform, as do the BBC, Viacom, Showtime, Red Bull, loads of companies.
Yeah, and we spoke earlier about the fact that I personally might not approach you, but if I had a business, then
For sure.
yeah, I would give you a call and I could sign up and use your platform.
Yeah, we're more kind of enterprise focused, more so. Purely around kind of support and support levels. So we guarantee uptime and kind of we're there for you and all of the stuff you'd expect from an enterprise provider.
Yep. Wicked. And you're here.
Yeah.
So you must have an opinion about what AI is.
Yeah.
So what is AI to you?
What is AI to me? So it's interesting. I kind of think like things change all the time. And right now, I would say that it's when a machine self-learns and self-improves over time.
Mm-hmm.
However, I kind of prefer to call it optimized human-assisted intelligence because ultimately people seem to forget that a machine is trained by a human.
Right.
All machines are trained by humans, whether or not it's because of the data set that is provided,
Yep.
or whether it is just simply them training it. And so, yeah, although it's not as catchy, for me it's, optimized human-assisted intelligence.
And it has a funny acronym. What's that?
Oh, hi.
Oh, hi.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So is there anything that is, because we've been here for a couple of days now and we've been immersed in talking about AI with lots of different perspectives and on different subject areas and thematics and doing workshops. Is there something that has really stood out for you during these couple of days, or something that is new or exciting? Or
I think that my kind of overarching topic has been that we need a way for us to be able to audit machines. And when a machine is allowed to make a decision on behalf of a human, the human needs to understand how and why it's made that decision. And I think we will struggle without being able to audit that, purely down to bad actors.
right.
And a machine, like I said, with optimized human-assisted intelligence, like the Mercedes-Benz self-driving car, like they have announced that it will do whatever it can to save the driver's life, right? Because it has been trained in that way.
Yep.
Now, that's been transparent. Think of all the things that haven't been transparent and aren't going to be transparent, and who is providing that data, where the biases are coming from.
Yes.
And injected biases.
Yeah.
And I think we just need to be really careful.
Yeah, so it's interesting, the Mercedes example, because they've been transparent, but it might not be something that you want to hear, and you will presumably vote with your money or your feet, however.
I mean, if you're buying a car, you might decide that is the direction you want to vote. But,
exactly.
Yeah.
But then at least we can have an open conversation with that because we have some appreciation for what's going on.
Yes.
Yes. What was the other thing you said? The second thing.
So just in general, it's just the biased data, right?
Yes.
And so we know that facial recognition technology is inherently racist. We know that there's the prison algorithm in the States all around kind of whether or not someone is likely to reoffend, and it takes all of the historic data. So we have to somehow work out how to. The weird thing is when you're presented with biased data, to try and turn it around, you actually have to present it with more biased data. Like we as humans have to somehow work out how to retrain these models so that they're not biased.
Yeah.
But that just adds more bias. And so it's I just find it an incredible problem that we've got to work out how to solve it in a transparent manner.
Yes. Yeah. There's no apparent answer to that necessarily.
Not when it comes to corporations, no. I mean, look at the Volkswagen emissions test, right?
Yeah.
Like in fact, someone mentioned something the other day, which is that by law, corporations in the States have to increase share value. Like they aren't allowed to do anything that doesn't increase share value. And I find that itself amazing. But it's we can't. Well, my stance is actually we can't really trust machines to make decisions on our behalf, in my opinion. I think we need to be very careful. I'm not sure if I am looking forward to the future of this. Now, it's funny because obviously I work in kind of in this space, but it's all the way Arslan is the human-assisted intelligence. That our machines, so our bots, right? They're messenger bots, they're messaging bots, they're chat bots, they're whatever you want to call them. I don't like to call them chat bots, but that's what the press call them.
Yep.
They are 100% trained by a human, and the human decides absolutely what and how they respond and what with.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you end up with the whole Microsoft type example, right?
Yes, yeah. I think so. To be totally transparent, like you're saying, your platform is completely trained by human, and you have a tiny bit of natural language processing,
For sure,
which is a model which is well known and used to translate into synonym. Natural language, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And then it can then match that with
Correct.
something in the system.
Correct.
Yes.
It's ultimately a decision tree, which is what I would not describe as AI. However, certainly our competitors seem to describe it as AI. And in fact, we were discussing earlier what is AI.
Yep.
And the problem we have at the moment is that AI seems to be anything that you don't understand. It seems to be a kind of there was another term, a suitcase term. Word or a phrase to describe everything that you just don't really understand and chuck it into a bucket, and if a computer does it then it's AI, and you're like, we think we need to be careful with that.
Yes.
It's been an interesting week. We've had the ethics discussions have been a lot. There's been a lot of ethics discussions, and especially around the whole we've had the whole Cambridge Analytica issues. We've had all of these issues, and I'm from the utopian web, right? Like back many years ago, we had open data, and open data and the utopian web, where ultimately we were sharing data because that's what the internet was made for, and it was all around how to make bigger and better things for the general populace. As time goes by, it's clear that there are many, many, many people, and more people every day out there, who aren't from the utopian web. They are people that are using the tools that we've created in nefarious ways.
Yeah.
And hopefully, from the last 6 months, and hope from now on, people will primarily start to think of what are the ways bad actors can use these tools first.
In the design process, in the development process.
100%.
Yeah.
Rather than being kind of, there aren't bad actors out there.
Yeah.
People won't do bad things with these things.
Surely not.
Right, but that is where we lived before.
Yeah.
But
I mean, going back to bad actors, it's like you're saying with the Volkswagen example. It's not just hackers or impersonators or people trying to steal your information. It's also those institutions and those organisations that may be doing things nefarious in the way they produce stuff. And that might not be symptomatic of the whole organisation necessarily.
Sure.
Someone somewhere has done something, and
100%.
Yeah,
and it's hidden from everyone else, right? Yeah. Like there's been a lot of discussion around medical use cases for AI as well, and I think if we think of the bad actors first, I think it does change things. So. With neural networks, you can't inspect them. You can't see what's gone on. You can see what data has gone into them, and you can see the results that it comes out, but you can't actually see how and why it's made a decision. And when it comes to medical diagnosis, for example, let's say a drug company sponsors in some way a person working on one of these systems. And it could be a developer, it could be the company, it could be someone in that organisation somehow.
It might not even be explicit.
No, for sure. Who then adds bias data to the model to state that this drug gets bought more. Now, when it becomes such a black box as a neural network, I think it's really I don't think it's a good place to be, and I think we need to work out a way to audit these machines somehow.
Yeah, so there must be some sort of check and balance there, and there might even be some sort of thing where you say, well, maybe these things don't get the last say, and in some circumstances,
right, where it's guiding the human to make the decision.
Yes, it's there, as reference or an analysis piece,
an extra
research.
Tool, an extra thing to look at.
Yeah.
The problem though with that does come in that we start relying on tools, and our knowledge and ability worsens over time when we rely on certain tools. And so if a doctor is relying on a tool to help them with their diagnosis, and then over time they become worse at diagnosing themselves. And so I think that's also something we need to be careful around, unless there is full transparency and honesty with regards to these systems. And I just don't know if we're ever going to get that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Sorry for the dystopia.
All right.
Hi, Dan.
Hello.
Thanks for talking to me. If you'd just like to quickly introduce yourself.
Sure. I am Dan Saffer. I am a designer and sometime author who is currently a designer at Twitter. And I've written a couple books about design, and I've worked across hardware, software, devices, apps, car interiors, appliances, you name it. Pretty much I've probably designed something at least in that category.
Yeah.
So I've had a long and varied career.
So we're here at the AI retreat. What do you think AI is to you, or do you have your own personal definition of what that means?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to me, AI is a collection of algorithms that collectively can do some kind of decision making, some kind of learning, and some kind of responses to some kind of outside stimuli, so that they can. I mean, they're mostly like decision-making machines, I would think. That, and the more sophisticated ones can make bigger and better decisions than more kind of narrowly focused ones. And eventually you'll have ones that can make amazing giant decisions. I mean, but right now we're certainly at things that are very targeted to make very specific kinds of decisions, whether that's about the stock market or recommendations or various and sundry kind of computational problems.
Yeah, I kind of wish, as you're introducing yourself, that this was the design podcast now as well, because then I would have asked you about all that stuff. Do you think there is a thread that, from your experience with this kind of multidisciplinary design that you've done, that you can put in practice to this new technology, or implementing some decision making in your designs? Or?
Yeah, I mean, if you think, my career has been a lot about productizing new technology, and so something that, I think machine learning and AI are kind of the next kind of wave of those things. So when I think about the kinds of products that I've done in the past, and if you could take some of them and say, okay, what if this was 100 or 1,000% smarter? What could this actually do? And and if you take something as as simple / complex as Twitter, you can have if you say, okay, if I was gonna supercharge Twitter, what would that be? What would that be like? Or if I was gonna supercharge, your dishwasher, what would that be like? If your dishwasher could talk to a whole bunch of other dishwashers and they could, problem solve, and what kind of world would that be? So, so I think, and I think as we start to get more kind of off the shelf AI, things will be really, really interesting, really fast. So things like the robot that I worked on, if I could have, if we could have gotten some kind of, simple AI plugin, it's like, oh, okay, this is the navigation plugin, and this is the, activity detection plugin, and
right.
These kinds of things. And you could be like, oh, well, we'll just buy those, from whomever, and okay, wow, all of a sudden the robot in your house is 10 times smarter. I think that's the future that we're rapidly heading into.
Right. That is. Do you think some of those things could be retrofitted into?
Sure. I mean, if you're, if there's, if it's a cloud-based system, anything that's currently connected to the cloud could certainly use it. I mean, obviously there'll have to be some kind of, your average dishwasher, if we put AI into it, would only be able to tell a very limited number of things, but...
So at that point, it's to do with the sensing.
The sensors. The sensors are fairly dumb. What it could actually do with any information. You could send it the theory of relativity, but what could it do with it? Is it? Because the only thing it can really control is like a timer and rinsing and all those kinds of things, but. It couldn't say, wow, I've noticed that these, I guess it could say, well, with these 4 plates in this configuration, I've detected with this kind of grime that I've detected, but it's not solving super challenging problems, but it is solving a small, useful problem.
Yeah. Is there something about this week that you'll take away, something that's really struck you?
I mean, I think that a lot of my mind is churning with questions right now. So I don't have... There's nothing that I'm just like, oh my God, this is the way forward. This is the next thing. It's more like, wow, there are a lot of very important decisions that have to be made, and they have to be made fairly soon as we're building these things. And so I'm concerned that there aren't enough people involved in those kinds of decisions, or maybe not the right kind of people involved who aren't thinking at this level. So I mean, not that we're super geniuses, but we do come at this from a different perspective than someone who is tackling the significantly challenging, technical side of things. But I mean, that's to me, I guess, is now that I've thought a lot about the couple possible futures that we've discussed or have been brought up, it's like, wow, these things could be tools not just for good, which is kind of why I came here, because I assumed that they could be, super powerful tools for solving some of our most complex problems, which has always been my hope, that it would do things like, the AI would help us with things like global warming and climate change and income inequality. But I also realized, that they could be used to, accelerate those things, and that's really scary when you see, wow, the more processing power you have, the more power that you could have, and that, and who has enough money to buy processing power? It's those kinds of things that Gibson quote of the future is unevenly distributed. Well, AI will be unevenly distributed as well, and all of a sudden you've got this massive super brain that's able to do these incredible things, and who controls it, who owns it, who all those things are, and right now it's corporations. It's they're the only ones investing heavily in this. Other than maybe secret military programs and stuff that we don't know about, but yeah, I mean, it's mostly corporations leading the charge.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me at the end of the podcast. I've been looking forward to going to the AI retreat for maybe a year and a bit now, after I was asked originally by Andy Budd. I was unable to go to the event in 2017, and I was somewhat a little bit negative about the outputs from the first event, which appear on the juvetagenda.com website. The manifesto that can be found there is useful. However, I felt that the time of asking questions had passed, and that we had a firm idea of what some of the quandaries and issues there were surrounding this topic. Going into the event this year, I tried to keep an open mind, and I found that it was a space of conversation, sharing, and knowledge, and discussion. I think what we got out of the days on the retreat was a broader knowledge based on the participants there, and equally, hopefully, some other outputs which are yet to be seen. One of the things I did find interesting, though, after talking to one of the participants who'd been there last year as well, was the lack of a concern maybe this year for job loss and the educational piece which goes along with that. I felt like this year was more dedicated to data bias, personhood, and what could only be called business or design ethic. And join me next time. At the pinnacle of the 4 days we had there, I was able to run a machine ethics session in a hot tub. Extremely decadent, I know, but where else are you going to be able to sit around a hot tub with like-minded people talking about AI, ethics, machine ethics in the epic Norwegian countryside? With that alone, I'll go back next year if they ran one. So thanks again to Andy Budd and his team for running the AI retreat. And join me next time.